Good morning, afternoon, whenever you're watching this. I'm here today to record the Beyond History Humanities for the Family workshop. It's just me here. So, as I like to remind you, you will not see me answering questions in real time, like you will see with certain courses and other workshops. And so, please make sure that you do not hesitate to send those questions in. No matter when you're watching this, I love to answer questions and I love to make sure that you get what you can get out of a workshop that you pay for. And so, inevitably, I won't say everything. I can't say everything. And so, you will be having questions that likely a lot of people will have because maybe something I say leads naturally to a question. Or you will have questions that not a lot of people are having because it fits into a line of thinking that you are already within. And so please ask your questions. They do not bother me. I love to answer them. So, Beyond History, Humanities for the Family. What are we doing with this workshop? What are we attempting to accomplish here? So, I have a living history workshop and I have other humanities workshops. Those are available in a bundle along with this workshop. So if you just bought this one, then that bundle is still value. If you haven't taken any of the other workshops, you will still get more than your money's worth by purchasing the bundle. But they're grouped into a bundle because, and the reason that I mention that bundle is because humanities is a wide feast. And so what I could have done is just kept working through. So I have a history workshop. I have a current events workshop. I have a citizenship workshop. I have a civics specific workshop. And I have a biography workshop. So I could have just kept working through and I could have created an architecture workshop, a cultural studies workshop, a geography workshop, and a mapping workshop. And then bundled all of those together. But the reason that I was compelled to sort of stop here in that humanities feast and talk about humanities as a feast going beyond history is because I believe that we can sometimes, particularly in the current culture of living education that we're in, we can hyper focus on history as our humanity and sort of think of the rest as solely tied to that history, as afterthoughts, as extras, or as something that just has to be done systematically and either has to be tied to our history or can't be related to our history at all. It just has to be a systematic approach to those things. I think that we are not always thinking rightly about the feast of humanities and how rich and varied and wide that it is, and how history is so important, but that the rest of it is equally important. And so we're specifically talking because of that, for that reason, and to that end, we're talking today about architecture, cultural studies, geography, and mapping. And the reason that I'm specifically talking about those things is because I already have a biography, current events, civics, citizenship, and history workshop. If I didn't, then this might be a much longer workshop where I sort of sat in the current thought that I'm in about what I'm seeing us do with humanities, and I might have included them all, but I'm not going to because I already have those workshops available. But just know that when I'm talking about humanities as a whole and the wide feast, I am including biography and citizenship and civics and history. History is just as important. When I say beyond history, I don't mean that we should disregard history or minimize history. History is just as important as the rest of the humanities, but I mean that we have to be able to think beyond it. And think beyond it to things that are related and connected to it, but also think beyond it to things that aren't, and that it is not only okay, but good and worthy to be studying and exploring, despite the fact that they aren't directly related to or connected to our history. So just know that I'm including all of that in this conversation. Excuse me, but that I already have talked extensively about those other subjects. And while I have talked a little bit about some of these subjects within various workshops, I have never talked about them to this degree. And so that's why we're talking about these specifically. So these are sort of a way of looking at how you approach humanity, but then also specifically looking at these subjects if you need any inspiration or structure or ideas, or to understand the value of these things specifically. It's sort of twofold. I want you to be equipped for architecture, cultural studies, geography, and mapping. Yes. But I also want you to be able to think a new thought and widen your vision for humanities and the feast of them as a whole, even if you don't implement all of these things. And then if you get that from this workshop, or maybe you get both of those things, but you're still thinking, okay, but how do I apply that to current events and citizenship and biography and all of those things? Then there are other places that you can go and other workshops that you can take and listen to in order to help with those things. So I'm going to open with quotes like I always do. And I'm going to open with a quote about history. And for a workshop called Beyond History, that's a little ironic, but it is because it casts a vision for what history actually is and why we need other humanities alongside history in order to even obtain the fullness of what history itself is, much less the fullness and richness that is in all of the rest of it. So this is from a Parents Review article, and it says, we want to give reality to history by showing that it is not something remote to be found in books only. We want to show that the life of each child forms part of history, that we may lead him on to see that the whole world is different for each man that has lived, better for each noble life, and to feel quite early that God has sent him into the world with some work ready for him, and that his business is to do that work. And then Susan Schaefer Macaulay, who I'm sure you are aware of who she is, she says they are eager to have a story read which unfolds a descriptive panorama of some area or other. How dreary to try to remember the national product of Norway. But what fun to have one's imagination touched and to picture skating under Norwegian mountains, pausing to watch the ice-breaking ship enter the port with a catch of fish from the North Seas. And then Charlotte Mason herself says, let him be at home in any single region. Let him see with the mind's eye the people at their work and at their play, the flowers and fruits in their seasons, the beast, each in its habitat, and let him see all sympathetically. That is, let him follow the adventures of a traveler. And he knows more, is better furnished with ideas than if he had learnt all the names on all the maps. The way of this kind of teaching is very simple and obvious. Read to him, bit by bit, any interesting, well-written book of travel. So I think that those things just paints a picture of a widened vision for what humanities are, including history and geography and mapping even. What are we doing? Are we just learning all the names on every map? Are we learning the national product of Norway and calling that geography? Or are we seeing places and people as parts of the vast world and seeing ourselves as living within a world that is vast and goes so far beyond us in incredible ways and amazing ways, and in ways that we will never reach the end of. The well will never run dry of discovery and exploration of this vast, beautiful, colorful, varied, rich, textured, wonderful world that we live in. And so I think that all of those quotes paint a picture of that type of approach. And hopefully that's what we gain here as we turn more towards specific philosophy and then towards practicalities. So the key idea for all of this is to be a citizen of the world requires a widened vision. Something that I started saying because it just sort of etched itself into my brain and became a part of what I didn't even fully flesh out yet, but I just knew was important to me somehow in my homeschool. And I had to sort of navigate along the way what it meant, but I started saying it because I started thinking it somehow, is that my children are more than a citizen of the country that they live in. My children are citizens of the world. And in the age that we live in, it is rare to only ever be the citizen of one place. I'm saying it's rare as someone who hasn't really traveled that much. I've been out of the country once, and it was to Mexico, and I live in Texas, so it kind of doesn't count. And so I understand that home is important, and that understanding the place that you live in is important. And I talk about that elsewhere when talking about civics and things like that. But also, the whole world is really both so vast that we'll never explore all of it, but also within our reach. And so, whether our children go on to be citizens or at least travelers of the entire world, and they take the panoramic, beautiful, rich, vast feast of knowledge and ideas that we've spread before them, and they take that into those travels and into that place of citizenship beyond the place where they were born, or whether they don't, whether they're like me and they're in their 30s and they haven't been very many places beyond all over Texas, which is a really big place. So it should count for something, traveling all around it. Whether they are like that instead, and they still take the vast, rich, panoramic, varied, colorful feast of knowledge and ideas that we've spread before them, and still see the world, and also see the world through the eyes of the people of the world. It is still valuable either way. And either way, they are citizens of a world beyond a singular country, a singular place of birth. And so to exist as that, to fully live as the citizens of the world that they are, requires our vision to be widened. It requires us to lift up our eyes and look out to that world around us. So we're going to talk a little bit about what architecture, geography, mapping, and cultural studies are in a living education, and then look at each one specifically. So architecture in a living education. First of all, this subject specifically is accessible to everyone. It fits so many learning styles, and there is so many ways that you can go with architecture. There are so many options that it is truly perfect for communal learning, whether or not you do your history and geography communally. Your architecture lessons can be a place of either further connection, if you're like me and you do history and geography communally, or whether for whatever reason you hear me say that those subjects are great to be done communally, but you hear me but have decided otherwise in your own discernment and wisdom and discretion. Either way, architecture is either a way to further connect, or it is a way to draw everyone around historical ideas in a way that is perfect for communal learning, even if you have reservations about history itself, or even if you have kids with a much wider age gap than mine, and so history together has its limitations, whatever the case may be. So first of all, it is truly a subject that is perfect for communal learning, and in a living education, that matters. It is the study of the history of humanity, not just its structures. The structures that humans create are a significant part of, and a picture of the age of history that those humans live within. If we look at the art, the music, the politics, the religious movements, the literature, the poetry, the cultural movements, all of those things of an age of history, and we don't look at its buildings, then we have not seen that age of history. It is truly the study of the history of humanity. And it is also an art form. And so it is also the study of the art that's been left behind by different ages of the history of humanity. It is the science of relations on display. We're going to look, when we look at architecture specifically here in a minute, we're going to look at all of the elements of the rest of our homeschool feast that are found within architecture. And so for that alone, I think it has value in showing children organically and synthetically, without fabricating a unit study, architecture is its own sort of unit study in itself, authentically, organically. It shows children how connected things really are, and how the science of relations really is present in all that we learn without having to forcibly and arbitrarily connect it. It is a deeper and more contextual understanding of history, science, art, religion, culture, citizenship, and more. Buildings are tied to what's happening historically, what's happening scientifically, what's happening in religion, what's happening artistically, what's happening in culture, what cultural movements are markers of the age that we're looking at, what's happening in citizenship and the way people relate to each other and their governments and the world. All of that architecture is a view of, a part of, a marker of, a lens for. It is all of those things. Geography in a living education gives children a 3D view of the world. When we look at geography here in a minute, we're going to talk about a panoramic approach to geography, allowing children to see the world as a three-dimensional place, not as just a map of locations, but as a place where people live and exist and travel between and relate to each other and impact each other. It's primarily carried out through the reading and narrating of geography readers and travel books. And so by primarily, I mean that those things carry on the longest. So in Mason's program, and also in what I would recommend for a living education, good books that show geography in action, travel books, and just books about places. Those books start very early on in first grade-ish, and they carry all the way through. There are travel books that are for adults, not for adults because they're, not appropriate for children in any way, but because they're written to adults and that are super engaging, super interesting. And there are books written to children about various places and also travel books specifically that make geography come alive, that show geography as a world that is dimensional, multiple dimensions, filled with people that have impacted that world and that have impacted each other. So when I say primarily, I mean that is the thing that you can do the longest from first grade to 12th grade. Reading good books that show geography as alive is something that you can do all the way through. And then other things you sort of stagger and scaffold, just like we do with a lot of things in living education. But geography readers and travel books are interesting. They're broad. They widen our vision. They show us so much beyond just learning the capitals of the states, right? They show us so much, and they show us what geography is connected to. Because again, geography is often connected to religion and history and science and culture and all of those things. And it also provides context and relevant material for mapping lessons, because the reason that I separate geography from mapping is because as we pursue a panoramic three-dimensional view of the world, we also want children who can practically understand the structure of the world. And so mapping is the more practical side of this two-sided coin. It is the learning of skills, the acquiring of actual factual knowledge of what the difference between Europe and Asia is. Those things are also important, but they just aren't enough if our children are going to truly see the world as a beautiful, vast, living place filled with people, interesting, wonderful, colorful, rich, varied, impactful people. So geography and then mapping, but our geography provides context for the mapping. If we're just memorizing the countries in Latin America, but we've never met the people of Latin America, or we don't understand the landscape of Latin America, we don't know the culture of Latin America, then those countries have no contextual basis. They mean nothing other than a list of facts. But when we have met the people of Latin America, when we do understand the landscape, the flora, the fauna of Latin America, when we know the culture of Latin America through geography and also through cultural studies, then it becomes meaningful to learn the countries in Latin America because they are separate specific countries. They do each have their own culture, their own imprint on the world. And so it becomes meaningful and significant. It gives context, but also significance to the act of simply memorizing the countries in Latin America. Mapping in a living education brings practical knowledge to this wide vision. If we're going to widen our vision of the world, then we should have practical knowledge of the world. Practical knowledge is not bad. Facts are not bad. Memorization is not bad. It is just not the whole of a widened vision. It brings or builds skills necessary for utilizing this wide vision. If we're going to have a wide vision of the world, we can use it by knowing how to read a map, by knowing how to locate a place, or understanding without having to locate it, that place's location in the world and the places that it's connected to, and why something might be happening based upon its geographical location. When we hear something in the news that we have a wide vision of the world, we can think about the people there, the way they live, the things they care about, the way they see the world. We have met the people. We understand something of that place. But then we also have the skill necessary to say, oh, right. And it also borders this place and this place. And so it's been impacted this way by this and this way by this. And that's probably the backbone of the foundation for what's happening politically here, or what's happening geographically here, or whatever. Cultural studies in a living education introduces children to the people of the world. Geography and cultural studies are so often intertwined. So I'm separating them because I think it's important to think about each of them intentionally. And they can take on different forms sometimes. But in our geography lessons, we should be meeting people, because people make up places, right? But then we also are understanding the landscape and the flora and the fauna and the geographical history, and how long people have had access to those places and how they discovered them and what the limitations are and all of those things. And so we're not solely meeting people, right? And so then in cultural studies, we are oftentimes understanding the flora, the fauna, the landscape, the geographical locations, the limitations, how long people have had access to it, all of those things, but we're focused on the people. So there's a lot of overlap. They're often intertwined, but one places equal importance on a lot of things, and cultural studies really places the most importance upon people, meeting people and understanding the vast, beautiful array and variety of people that the world is made up of. It's the heart of a panoramic view of the world. If we're going to study geography and architecture and history and all of those things, and we're going to have a widened vision and a panoramic view of the world, then there has to be a heartbeat for those things. And the heartbeat is the people that we get to meet and the cultures that we get to understand. It brings our gaze outward and upward towards the beauty of variety, towards understanding that there is so much life and so much world beyond our four walls and the lives that we individually live. And those lives are beautiful and important and they matter, but there is so much beyond them. And anytime that we can study something that lifts our gaze from ourselves, and the gaze of our children from their lives and their desires and their struggles and everything about them, and cast it outward to other people and to the world, that is a good thing. It contributes to a true understanding of the Imago Dei. This is rooted directly to our theology. When we tell children that all people are made in the image of God, but then we don't intentionally spend time getting to know those people and valuing their culture, instead of just sort of considering them as other and as items on a list, right? These are all the people groups in the world. These are all the cultures of the world, and they're all made in the image of God. Check, check, right? When we sort of take that approach, we're cheapening what that actually means. And one day, at some point, our children can see through our theological verbal expression of the Imago Dei without our actual value of the Imago Dei, and how beautiful and significant and important that it is, and how in order to actually value it, we have to actually value people and the pursuit of understanding and knowing and meeting people. Okay, so now specifically talking subject by subject. So for architecture, the thing that I first have here for you is a little view of um, the science of relations that exist inherently, organically within architecture, and how many things that architecture is connected to. This is not so that you can overthink connecting your architecture to all of these things. This is not so that you can make your architecture lessons into a unit study that includes math and history and Bible and Shakespeare and all those things. But it's so that you can see how, when you study architecture, you are finding context for and adding dimension to all of these other things. And so it is valuable. It is worth having a spot in your schedule. It is worth intentionally planning and preparing for and studying. So, an architectural idea, type, or structure, and then its relevance to other studies or to a greater understanding of the world is what we're looking at here. So, both the pyramids and the Louvre show the Pythagorean theorem in action. So, that is a mathematical connection. Again, you can organically discover and explore that. You don't have to make all of your math lessons about the Pythagorean theorem. Just because you're looking at the pyramids, you do not have to arbitrarily create a unit study. This is just to show you the vast array of connections that you will inevitably discover along the way. Elliptical ceilings, that is directly connected to John Quincy Adams being able to eavesdrop on members of the House of Representatives, which is historically very significant. If you don't know why, go and find out why. But when you read that in history, if you don't understand what an elliptical ceiling is and how it functions, then you don't really understand how he was able to do that and why it's significant. Portcullis, lattice work, gates, all of those things are a part of the story of King Arthur and his knights. And again, if you don't understand exactly what those things are, then you don't necessarily understand the full story there. And you don't have to. You don't have to know what everything means. That's not what I'm saying. But things come alive the more that we do know. And there is so much to be known in the study of architecture. The entire Tudor type of architecture and Tudor period, it is directly connected to the way that the globe was constructed, why it was so easy to burn, and many other things. I could go down a rabbit trail there, but many other things. Ziggurat architecture is connected to the Tower of Babel, understanding why they were constructing it the way they were constructing it and what has come after. Indigenous homes show us their lifestyle, their family structures, and geography. When you look at a longhouse, you understand something about the structure of a longhouse. I mean, when you look at how it's built, how they build it, how they make it, you understand something about the family structure of those indigenous people. A plumb line or a level surface, that is directly tied to the skill of carpentry. So that practical skill, but also just understanding what is being said when someone is talking about carpentry or construction, what that means. Log cabins, directly revealing of the atmosphere of the resources available to, the lifestyle of, the pursuit of, the dreams and vision of homesteading, pioneering families, forestry, its impact on homesteading and forestry, what came before, what was happening within that, and what came after. Skyscrapers show us something about population, commerce, economy, design. I don't have that on here, but design, the modernist way of seeing the world, so much. It shows us so much. Columns, directly connected to Greek culture and art. We still use primarily 3 types of Greek columns in our architecture today. And they each have a name. They each have a reason for existing. They each have a distinction to them. They each have a significance. And so understanding that is illuminating. So within this chart is math, history, Bible, Shakespeare, literature, practical skills, culture, science, politics. And all of these things are natural. They're not forced into a unit study, but they are contextual. Context is provided through many lessons over many years. So you're not necessarily going to be studying elliptical ceilings because it's within the framework of whatever you're studying for architecture. At the same time, that you're studying John Quincy Adams. That's super cool if it happens, or if you make it happen. Awesome, cool. But even if you're not, one year when you study elliptical ceilings and you understand more about those, and then another year when you read about John Quincy Adams, the connection is still made. The context is still there. It is a wide feast spread over many lessons throughout many years that gives us this type of understanding. It is not taking this chart and sitting down to create specific lessons for these things, although some of them would be cool. And I'm not saying you can't do that. What I'm saying is that's not what I'm showing you. What I'm showing you is over many years of prioritizing architecture lessons and understanding how big and vast and important and tied to so many other things that architecture is, then all of this context is discovered over time. So a basic lesson format for any architecture lesson, no matter what resources that you use, is to read, narrate either orally, by building something, by drawing something. So making a model of something, or by copying a diagram of something. So I would say primarily those when it comes to architecture. But then other times just orally narrating. Of course, we read and we narrate everything. Examining something, if there's a photo or a model or a video available, architecture is tangible. And so being able to tangibly see something is important. So reading, narrating, examining, and then adding it to whatever your timeline is, your history chart, just discussing where it fits on the timeline, even if you can't necessarily get it into your history chart, at least just discussing where the thing that you are looking at fits within history. Just briefly, you don't have to belabor it, but that's an important part of understanding how architecture is tied to the history of humanity. So architecture is history, art, and science. It's so many other things too, but it is vastly and significantly and specifically these things. So architecture as history, if you're going to sort of take a historical approach to architecture, what you could do is study the most important buildings of your current time period in history, or the most important features, so columns of your current time period in history. You could make sure that you add those things to your Book of Centuries and history charts instead of just discussing them. If you're going to take a more artistic approach, maybe you're not going to necessarily every week add what you're studying to your history chart, and you might just discuss where it fits within the historical timeline. But if you're going to take a historical approach, then you're going to want to make sure that you're adding it to your history charts. Discuss the architecture involved in significant events. So not only having your planned out systematic, here are the most important buildings of this time period. So we will look at all of these, but then also as you come across important and significant events in your history reading and in your history study, stopping to mark the buildings involved, the structures involved in those significant events is important with this approach. Study artifacts and buildings individually. So you could just take a building and look at it through a historical lens over 12 weeks, over an entire term, or over a significant period of time. Architecture as art. Mason said the artist has indispensable lessons to give us, whether he convey them through the brush of the painter, the vast parables of the architect, or through such another cathedral built of sound. So right along with art and music there, she includes architecture without skipping a beat and without thinking, because it is truly art. So if you're going to take an artistic approach to architecture, you could do picture studies and picture talks with images of buildings. So you could do exactly what you do with a painting, but with a picture of a building. Have your children study it quietly, have them make observations, read a little information about it. You can make building models as handicrafts and then find information about those models. You could study design and its connection to architecture. So you could sort of take the route of focusing on the design of the buildings, and then also including things like interior design and landscape design and other types of architecture in order to connect those to architecture as an art form. Discuss the elements of buildings and eras that are aesthetic in purpose. So make sure wherever you're at in history, if you want to take an artistic approach, that you you scope out and you talk about the structures, the buildings, the elements of buildings that are truly just for aesthetic value. So some buildings are purely for aesthetic value, but on a lot of buildings, even when they're functional, there are aesthetic elements that you can look at, and you can specifically hone in on those elements. If you're going to take a scientific approach to architecture, Mason included architecture specifically as a general science, just FYI. You would study technique, design, technologies, physics. You would talk about the actual building of these structures more than their design. You would focus on the design in so much as that requires scientific thinking. You could follow the development of architectural science and advancement over time. So instead of honing in on your current period of history or your current period of art or a particular artistic element, you could instead take a more overarching approach and say, okay, this is how architectural science, architecture as a whole has developed over time, as our engineering ability has, and our physics and our technology and our capability has developed over time. You could compare modern methods with ancient ones. Again, in order to find the science there. How did they lift those huge stones for Stonehenge? Exactly how did that happen, and how would we do it today? You could examine specific materials and their evolution and their use. So, for example, you could spend an entire year looking at concrete in architecture and how it has advanced and evolved and been used. You could look at specific elements, so design elements, just like you would do for an artistic approach, but instead of focusing on their aesthetic or artistic value, you could look at their physics. So, for instance, you could look at domes over time and look at the physics of the dome, how it's made, how it functions. You could examine specific structures and their physics. So again, how did that happen? How would it happen today? Or how is it happening right now? What building is being built? And what physics and engineering is being used in order to accomplish that? Now, you can also approach architecture in all of those ways. And so I hope that that gives you let me make sure my mic, yep, okay. I thought it was telling me my mic was off. I was muted, but it wasn't. You can, I hope that that gives you a way to really practically zero in on a way that will work for you if you incorporate an architecture lesson. But if that is not what you need, and that's not your personality, and that's not what you desire, and you love all of that, and you're just super intrigued right now by the vastness of this all, then what you can also do, and what I do, is just have an architecture spot in your schedule. Think about architecture term by term and make every term look different, serving a different purpose, using a different resource. Maybe the purpose is you have a resource you want to use, tying it to a different subject. So one term, your architecture might be specific to your history. One term, it might be specific to your science. One term, it might be specific to your art, the current art that you're studying. Or it just might be a little mixture of all of those at different times based upon the resources you want to use and the approach that you want to take. So I'm going to, as we talk about each subject, I'm going to show you a few resources. And what I have focused on here is what we are currently doing. Now, that's limited because we have done all of these subjects for a long time. But it is overwhelming and time consuming for me to show you 5,000 resources. So please just keep in mind that this is one approach. We take many approaches and it's different every term and every year. This is one approach. This is just to give you an idea of maybe some resources to look into, but also just the way that I'm thinking and what I'm aiming for and what I'm including and why. So with each subject, I'm going to tell you what we are currently doing, what we've done this year, what we're going to do this year. With architecture specifically, I went a little beyond this year, and I'm going to show you what we'll be doing next year in 2024. We start our school years in January. So what we will be doing next year as well, just because I think it's helpful. And we've done so much with architecture. I could have brought up a stack of resources 5 times this big to show you, but that's overwhelming. But I also think that our architecture this year, just showing you what we're doing, could be a little limiting. And I want you to get a vision for what this subject can look like. So I broke my own rule and I've gone a little beyond this year. And I'm going to show you what we'll be doing next year too, which is actually something that we've already done. And we will be repeating it. So our first term this year, which we've finished, we just looked at buildings in general. And sort of the history over time. We sort of took a overarching look at architecture. So we read The Story of Buildings by Patrick Dillon. I did that specifically because we had never really I'll show you inside. Each section has, let me make sure, 1 second. It connects one building. Yes. Okay. I'll show you this. It connects one building to the previous building that it is showing you. And so it's definitely a overarching historical look at this. So this is St. Petersburg on this 2-page spread. And then it's got a 2-page spread called Living in the Past from St. Petersburg to the Crystal Palace. And then the next spread is the Palace of Glass, the Crystal Palace. So I did that because we've never really looked at architecture as sort of one sweeping history. And so that was great. It's also great because we are really, a lot of our studies and a lot of subjects this year are global, and then also European. If there's a region that we're in more than any other, it's European, but a lot of things that we're doing are global. And so I sort of wanted a just overall global overarching approach. So, okay. SIRI really thinks I need her today obsessively, and I don't need her at all. So we read that. And then along with that, so a little bit from each week, we read Round Buildings, Square Buildings, and Buildings That Wiggle Like a Fish. I love this book so much. And what this book does is look at elements. It has a ton of photographs, a ton. And it starts out talking about 3 wonderful buildings, 3 of the most famous, beautiful buildings in the world as sort of an introductory look. And then it looks at different elements of architecture. So stones, doors, windows, walkways, and each section is short, accessible, readable, discussable. It was a great resource. So we did that in term 1. In this term, in term 2, there's a book that I don't have because it's at the library. I had to turn it back in. Somebody had a hold on it, and I will get it again, and we will continue. But it is called Working Boats, and I've showed it before. And I also linked it in a newsletter, so you might have seen that. But it is the architecture of boats. We are studying the ocean this year, and we're also studying the history of sailing. And so that's been perfect. Boats are truly a work of architecture. They are constructed. An architect has to design what a boat is for and how people can get the most out of their life on various boats. And so that has been great. But then alternating with that, we are looking at the architecture of lighthouses. And so with this one, Lost Lighthouses, we are looking at, so this just has a ton of America's lost lighthouses, and it has a picture and about this much information. Occasionally it's a little longer, but about this much information about each lighthouse. So totally accessible and readable. And this gives us an opportunity to truly look at the architecture and study it. And so we're doing a bit of picture study here, and then also historical study. And so I hope that you're seeing and continue to see that I really incorporate art, science, history, all of it into architecture. I just have an architecture slot, and then I just choose what I think would be best for if it's tied specifically to history, or if there's something that I can think of that fits our art. Or whether, this is tied to our history, geography, science, all of it, because we're studying the ocean. So we're doing that one. And then this is more of a historical look at lighthouses and how they have been used and run and moderated and built. So there's architecture too, but that is our architecture this term, along with working boats. Next term, in term 3, our last term of this year, we're going to look at the wonders of the world. And so I have another book that I don't think that I've bought yet. I can't remember if it's at the library and I'm going to check it out, or if I need to go ahead and order that. But it is a book of wonders of the world. But then I also have the Dover Wonders of the World coloring book. And so we'll just be looking at each wonder of the world. But then along with that, we're going to look at other wonders of the world beyond just the official ones. And so I have amazing places. These are actually poems. And so we will read this for poetry. That will be a part of our poetry lessons. But then we will look at the architecture involved in and connected to those amazing places. So on the Mississippi, we will look at and find the architecture involved in that, but we'll read this in our poetry slot. And then, so Wonders of the World, there's a book, I don't have it here, but then along with a peculiar portfolio of 50 fascinating structures. This is from the Uncommon Compendium series. We also love the Extraordinary People and the Unusual Creatures one. Just side note, we read this in our short biography spot in our evening basket, and then we read this in our evening basket. We have read, we're not reading them now, but we have read this as part of our nature slot. So we love those too. Side note, but this one is the Curious Constructions one, and it has tons of, oh my goodness. That is so funny that I just opened to this. This is totally a free side note rabbit trail. But I, 2 weeks ago, went with my friend. We have been trying to go shopping together for the whole 4 or 5-ish years that we've known each other. It's just hard as moms, but we went antique shopping finally, and I kept finding these baskets, and I was like, why are these baskets so expensive? If you know me at all, or if you've seen my living room, I collect with wicker and seagrass baskets. And I normally find them for very inexpensive. I have a basket wall, but it's an entirely like old wicker basket wall. It's like the old lady version. I love them, but I kept saying, why are these baskets so expensive? And then I read on a few of them that they were Longaberger baskets. I was like, what is that? I had never heard of that. Maybe you've heard of it and you're thinking, wow, Kristen, you are ignorant. But I had never heard of it. So we looked it up and I was like, Longaberger, okay, well, I'm going to own some Longaberger baskets. I'm going to have to find them for a good deal. I'm going to find somebody who doesn't know what they're worth, and I'm going to own them. I have to. I'm the basket lady. And I found out more about it. And then that night, my friend was watching a Curious Places kind of show, and she had never heard of it either until that day, and it just so happened to talk about the Longaberger building, and I did not know that was in here, and I just opened to it. So that's funny. But anyways, this is just all sorts of other wonders of the world, both natural and also man-made. So that will be in term 3. If we have time this year or next year, along the way, at some point, I would also like to look at this Minneapolis cityscape. Not look at, but read in its entirety. It is 2-page spreads, my favorite kind of book, about a lot of both historical and also current buildings in Minneapolis. And the reason why is because my husband lived in Minneapolis just as many years as he lived in Texas until we were married. And so it's all very personal to him. And I also love having a wide bird's eye view, but then also sometimes just zooming in and looking at a specific place. So I don't know that I will spend an entire term doing this. And so that is why I sort of just have it in my stack of, I'd like to do this year. We'll see how that works out, but maybe next year. And then lastly, next year we will be back in Egypt. We're in modern history this year. We'll be back in Egypt. And so we will repeat what we've done every time we've been in Egypt. And our architecture for the year will be about pyramids. So we will reread Makele's Pyramid. I love the Fast Forward series, so we will reread this one. We've read it a few times. The Architecture of the World series is a little more in depth, and so I will read maybe portions of it, a lot more in depth, not a little bit, but also probably assign some of it as reading for my oldest, And then we will look at the ancient Egypt stuff they left behind photos. We will do picture studies of not just the structures, but also the artifacts from ancient Egypt as part of our architecture study. It's a great connection. Also, we'll be doing the ancient Egyptian architecture unit from Little World Wonders, which I forgot to grab. I do have it purchased and printed, but I forgot to grab. So I figured I would show you next year too, just so that you can see that sometimes it's definitely more historical. Next year, it will be a deep dive into pyramids, which we've done before. And that is directly connected to our history. And then other times it's more artistic or overarching or specific to a certain city, et cetera, et cetera. So that is architecture. Let's talk about geography and mapping. They are two sides of one coin. I separated them, but also they really are intertwined. So Charlotte Mason says this: most of us have gone through a good deal of drudgery in the way of geography lessons. But how much do we remember? Not very much. Just the pleasant bits we heard from traveled friends about the rain or Paris or Venice, or bits from the voyages of Captain Cook, or other pleasant tales of travel and adventure. We begin to see the lines we must go upon in teaching geography. For educative purposes, the child must learn such geography, and in such a way, this mind shall thereby be stored with ideas, his imagination with images. For practical purposes, he must learn such geography only as, the nature of his mind considered, he will be able to remember. In other words, he must learn what interests him. The educative and practical run in one groove, and the geography lesson becomes the most charming occupation of the child's day. Now, she says that a lot. She is a fan of hyperbole, and so she says that a lot of things are the highlight of a child's day. But I do think that geography can be a charming occupation of the child's day, and I love how she describes here the difference between the drudgery that we've often experienced and that we sometimes distill geography down to, even in our pursuit of a living education, and the way that geography comes alive when it is told through the lens of traveling the world and seeing the world as what it is. So geography and mapping should feed the mind with ideas, provide the imagination with pictures, be personal and relevant, be adventurous, be able to be remembered, the science of relations, be engaging and interesting. That all comes from Mason's quote there. Now, each of those take on different forms. They are prioritized to different degrees. They are present in different ways and different kinds of lessons. So I don't think that we have to overthink that. For instance, the geography of Europe is not necessarily personal to my children, but it is relevant, and it becomes more personal the more that they meet people in different European countries in their cultural studies, right? So I don't think we have to overthink these things, but I do think that her quote provides a great list of the way that we should be viewing what geography and mapping accomplishes. So I have here a little comparison of inferential geography. So that would be the way that most of us were taught geography. Provides geographical terms, statistics, facts, systems, and formulas. None of those things are bad. And I think those things should be included. But that's what inferential geography provides primarily. It expects students to apply those facts with or without context. If there happens to be context in a history lesson, then great. But there is not a pursuit of context in inferential geography. It tends to be misleading. It lacks information for context and depth. So it leads us thinking that, you know, things like Hawaii is closer to the mainland than it actually is, and that it is across the world from Asia and Australia, when that's not the reality. Or that, Alaska and Russia, all of Russia, are across the world from each other, when the tip of Russia is within shouting distance of Alaska in reality, right? So it's misleading. It lacks depth, it lacks context, it lacks those dimensions that we talked about. It strips the world of mystery and beauty. It doesn't allow us to stand in awe and wonder of the world and its vastness. Map work is primarily used for memorization and proof of mastery. Do you know the capitals or do you not? right? Never mind what you know about the people of Pennsylvania and the culture of Pennsylvania and the people who settled there and why the food that they eat there is indicative of the people who settled there and the ways that they passed down that culture that they brought with them and the new culture that they created, right? No matter what you know about all of that, do you know the capital, right? Do you know its most imported and exported product or whatever, right? It cheapens and minimizes the world and places of the world to facts about the world. It underestimates children, minimizes the world, dehumanizes people, and ignores the creator. It is extremely limited. It is reductionist. It is minimizing, and it is misleading. And it's boring. But panoramic geography is what we are in pursuit of. It unrolls the Earth's landscape region by region while simultaneously building a store of geographical ideas. So by knowing, you know, what different geographical concepts are, by knowing the difference between a, you know, a bay and a whatever else, a sound, then as you encounter those things, as you go region by region, or as you find them in other subjects like your history, etc., then you understand more of that. But again, this happens over many lessons throughout many years. It preserves the literary character of a living education. We can learn a lot about the world through story. We can't learn everything, and we should also learn some practical mapping skills, but we can learn a lot about the world through story. It presents facts naturally and contextually, provides images for the mind. Map work is used to solidify concepts and images, and it respects children, broadens the world instead of minimizes it. It values humanity because the focus is on it instead of dehumanizing it. And it provokes worship of the creator because the world truly is a beautiful place, and there are truly lots of wonders of it. So some practices for geography and mapping, generally speaking. Read and narrate geography readers and travel tales. Anytime that you can, and at least one of those a year, I think is important from first grade through 12th grade, no matter what else you're doing. And you will see when I show you geography that I do lots of other things. And I think that it all has value and merit, and that there's room for all of it, and that you can spread a wide geographical feast. But I think that story, so some sort of travel tale, some sort of book that just shows geographical concepts literarily or within the context of the story is important. Use maps and atlases to identify locations and concepts that you encounter. So outside of your mapping lessons, pull out mapping. And by the way, I do have geography lessons, and then I have a mapping slot separate in my schedule. I think that is, it allows you to see them differently, related, intertwined, connected, overlapping, but different. And it allows you to allow each to serve its own purpose. And it allows you to be intentional with both. So I do recommend that. But aside from your mapping lessons, in your geography lessons or after them or whatever, pull out your maps and your atlases and just locate the places that you're encountering. Just give a visual to the ideas that you are consuming. Utilize drawn and acting narrations. Make geography go beyond just verbal narration and reading, or just reading and maps. Allow your child to narrate in a variety of ways, as you do with everything else. I put that specifically here because I think, again, we can see certain aspects of a living education one way and see other aspects of it another way, when in reality, the heart of them all is often so similar. And we can use so many of the same techniques in all of them. We just don't think to. Prioritize variety. I say that about a lot of subjects. Variety is good. It is key. I think that we're sort of entering a little bit of a trend of telling moms, like, use the same curriculum all the way through. Be super consistent, but by consistent, they mean like be super systematic and not varied. I'm seeing some posts and some videos and things that say that, and I disagree. I think that being consistent means intentionally spreading a wide feast over and over and over and over, year by year, term by term. I don't think that it means that we need to minimize variety, or that we need to use a singular set of resources or a singular curriculum. I think that just like with math and language and so many other subjects, variety is key. You're going to get a little something different out of each resource, each type of book, each way of approaching this. And again, when I show you our geography just for this year, I hope that you see that there are lots of different ways to approach it and that something different comes out of all of them. So prioritize variety. So the uniformity of your lesson should be a secondary concern to you. Just having a weekly lesson, that's the consistency, but they should be varied. They should be a wide feast within a feast. Types of lessons, your reader that we already talked about, a geography reader, mapping, that is a type of geography. I have it as its own separate thing. And then all of these others sort of rotate through our geography slot, but it is a type of geography. Practical and physical geography. We did this a lot more when my children were younger, and you can do that as well when your children are younger. And then it also does come up in our scouting lessons, and so we are still doing some of it. I don't really have to intentionally plan physical, practical geography anymore. Physical geography specifically. I'll talk more about practical geography in just a second, but physical geography, because it is a part of our scouting lessons and because we did it a lot when my children were younger. So we did things like going to the park and making sure that we went to a park that was on the intersection, at the intersection of several streets, so that we can actually see what streets that intersect look like and how many of them are in the center of town. And, you know, doing things like looking at going to a hill and seeing how many steps it took us to get over it, and then imagining a mountain in relation to that hill, things like that. That is great when children are younger, and it is still somewhat in our scouting lessons. It comes up, and I think that it is present enough in that way. Practical geography can be that. It could be things like, you know, counting out steps like we did at the park and on the hill and things like that. But it can also be like geography memory work, just truly learning gently and slowly, and not as a replacement for living geography, but along with living geography, just learning geographical terms. And we do that as well. And then systematic geography is a lesson that is, okay, we're going to take this topic. And so you'll see in my mapping lesson, you'll see that I am going to display that within mapping, but also I do have a systematic geography lesson in our homeschool, along with some slots that are available for just geography. And those can be any sort of fun geography that I have found that we want to be pursuing. And then in the systematic slot, you will see that it is a little more, it still has variety from term to term, but it's a little more, okay, let's take this topic and let's look at it from beginning to end. Let's start here, learn this part of this, then learn this part of this, so on and so forth. So that is a little different than just, okay, let's learn about London, which you're going to see. That's what we're doing right now in our other slot. So just to be clear, and because I know I'll be asked, I have a slot in treasure time. So altogether for both of our days that we do treasure time, which is like our morning time, I have a slot both of those days. So that's 2 slots that are for whatever variety of fun geography that I find and that we want to pursue. And then I have 1 weekly geography slot that is for more systematic geography. And then I have a mapping slot. So that is what I have in my schedule. But those are some types of geography lessons. Another note here is that you can create geography streams. So I sort of just displayed that in my own schedule. I have sort of fun panoramic geography and systematic geography. They are different streams of geography, and mapping itself is another stream. So you can sort of think of it that way. You can think of, okay, I'm going to have 2 lessons here. One is going to be this stream and one this stream, just like you would have history streams, right? You would have American history and world history. You can create streams of anything. I have science streams. I have different ways of approaching science at this place in my schedule and this place in my schedule. Same thing with geography. I think that it's helpful to think of it that way, so that you don't think that you have to do everything at once, but that you also don't wake up and go, oh, wait, hold on. We've only done a lot of this and not a lot of this, which can still happen sometimes. It's homeschool. You can pivot. You can go over to that other thing and it's fine, but it prevents some of that. And then also look for context and inspiration for your geographical ideas in your other humanities. Now, you don't have to connect all of your geography to every single one of your other humanities, but when you are sort of running out of geographical ideas, particularly in a different slot than your more systematic geography, but even there, you can look for inspiration and context for those in your other humanities. So you will see that our systematic geography is tied to our science this year. And you will see that our more panoramic fun geography is tied to our history and our cultural studies this year. I have found inspiration for those subjects in those places. Mapping, some general practices for mapping. Start with physical maps. So again, when my children were younger, we did clay maps and sand maps. That is not like a Montessori unschooling unit study thing alone. It's only that if you are arbitrarily connecting it, hyper fixated on it, and controlling every aspect of it. It is also a part of living education to do things physically. Mason always included work with the hands. So it's a part of a living education too. So if you have younger kids, start there. And you can also include those things for older kids too. We do not do a whole lot of that anymore, but we do still do some of it. We do more of that in our architecture. We, build structures with Legos and things like that, models and things like that. But we did do a lot of it when they were younger. Some of it. I don't know that we ever did a lot of it, but I did prioritize it, and I was more intentional about it when they were younger. Then you progress to drawing plans and maps. Draw maps of increasing difficulty. So just showing where the land and the water, bodies of water and masses of land can progress to things being more complex. Utilize mapping related to your tales. Every time that we have done so for instance, my Cinderella unit, we did Cinderella around the world. It includes mapping, but even if it didn't, I would include mapping with that. Anytime that we have done a study of tales that takes that approach, I always make sure to include mapping. So right now, our tales this year is just classic fairy tales. And so there's not a lot of mapping connection to be had. But like I said, we did, in the past, we've done Cinderella around the world. We've done American Indigenous tales. We mapped those. We mapped the Cinderella around the world. In term 3, I can't reach it, but in term 3 of this year, we're going to do the fairy lore from around the world, from Little World Wonders. So we'll be mapping every single one of those places. So you can create your mapping lessons, your mapping exercises out of your tales, your history. You will see that ours are tied to our history, your biography. We often look up places. They're not necessarily our mapping lessons, but we do look up places from our biography, your geography readers, etc. You can also just use your mapping slot for some systematic mapping work. You'll see that in my example in just a minute. So it can be tied to any of your other subjects, your humanities and beyond. It can also be systematic, but a systematic approach to mapping specifically. And it can also just be a slot in your schedule where whatever you've read that week, you think about and you just look up those places. It doesn't have to be as pre-planned as the things that I'm mentioning. Use map questions and map drills progressively at the child's pace. We do these just occasionally, maybe like once a term. Other people might want to do them more. I instead include a little bit of geography memory work so that it seems like all of our other memory work. There's a lot less pressure because of the specific needs and personhood and divergence of my children. But I think that you can include more drills and map questions than that. I just don't include a lot of drilling outside of our memory work slot because of the needs of my children. But it can be included. It is a part of mapping. It can be included along with a living panoramic view of geography, and there's nothing harmful in it. It teaches children to memorize the things that need to be memorized in order to have the practical knowledge and skill to use that widened vision of the world. No harm there as long as it's not the sole makeup of your geography lessons. Build a variety of maps and progress slowly. So again, with the variety, again, with the gentleness, again, with the context, anytime that you can have it be contextual to something else you're studying, and again, with moving at your child's pace. Incorporate contextual mapping and systematic mapping. I skipped ahead of myself there. So context would be tying it to your tales, your history, your biography. That's contextual mapping. Our mapping is two-part. Every week we have one lesson, but within that lesson we do two parts. And one part of that is it is contextual mapping. It is tied specifically to our history. And then the other part is systematic mapping. And you will see that in just a second. So before we finish off with cultural studies, I am going to show you everything that we're doing this year alone. This is just this year for geography. So a geography reader, we are about to start this one. We are studying again the ocean this year. So we're going to read Gone a Whaling by Jim Murphy, The Lure of the Sea and the Hunt for the Great Whale. So obviously the geography here is going to be focused largely on the sea. And that is great. You'll see that it ties in with other geography, but that is going to be our next geography reader. I don't think you can buy this anymore, but you could pretty easily make one if you wanted to. There's a sticker stuck there that doesn't belong there, a picture of a Bible. That's interesting. This was a resource that was previously available. I can check, but I don't think she has any physical products anymore, but it's a geography field guide. It was bound, but it came apart. And so I just put it in one of these rings, but it is geography memory work. It is, so these are all of the terms that fit the open water. So archipelago, atoll, beach, current, eddy, glacier, iceberg, island, isthmus, keys, lagoon, peninsula, reef, wave, whirlpool. Then these are all the ones that fit a river: bank, bluff, branch, brook, cliff, creek, delta, ford, levee, precipice, rapids, river, river mouth, river source, sandbar, shoal, stream, tributary, waterfall, watershed. All the terms that fit different large bodies of water. All the terms that fit a mountain: a butte, a canyon, a desert, a divide, a dune, a foothill, a geyser, a gorge, a gulch, a mesa, a mountain, an oasis, a pass, a peak, a piedmont, a snow line, a summit, a timberline, a volcano. So we just slowly work on these over many years. We've learned more and more of them, but I still just read many of them that I wouldn't be able to remember what they are and tell you. But each one has a visual. Again, I don't think that you can buy this, but I can maybe try to find something comparable, or you could probably make one. But I'm showing you anyway to show you that this is the extent of the drilling that I do, other than, like I said, about once a term we'll do a little bit of a map drill with the things that we've been learning in our mapping. But I just do some geography memory work. Gentle, slow. I'm not super worried about it or hyper focused on it. In our, let me find the other one. In our panoramic fun geography slots. So there are 2 of those each week. They are in treasure time. So, they're about 15 or 20 minutes each. In one of those, sorry, I've got a lot going on here. In one of those, they are completing one of these super fun, this is from Paper Pie, used to be Usborne, around the world mazes. So that's a Thai floating market. Russian roads. This is a Hawaiian beach. Barcelona rollerblading. So they're completing one of those. It's just fun. It doesn't give them too much geographical information, just a little bit of imagery, but it's just for fun. And then either if the city in here is in this city atlas, which I've also included in a newsletter and linked to because I really love it. If the city is in this book, then we will do the maze and then look up the city in this book. So it gives each number is tied to an activity that you would do in that city, which gives a surprising amount of geographical information. And then there is a little introduction about these people's travels there. And just a few geographical facts. So that is super fun. If it is not in this book, then I have just been looking up a video of like top 10 places to visit in Barcelona or whatever. And so that is one lesson in our week, and that is all year long. Super fun maze. And then that maze goes along with just exploring a U.S. city in here, or a video, or sometimes I will find that city in here instead if it is in the United States. I think I've only done that one time. I think there's only been one U.S. city that I found, and I think it was actually in the atlas, if I remember right. I'm not sure, but I found it in here too. But this is just a reference that I keep on hand for lots of lessons. Now, I will also be using this as well later in the year, so I will save that there. Trying not to spill my water. In our other lesson, that is for panoramic, fun, topical geography, super topical. So that is one lesson. Our other lesson right now is about London. So we're alternating between the super fun Paddington's Guide to London. He goes just place by place. Each place is just a few pages long. And then Bizarre London by David Long, who I love everything by David Long. But this is a little more narrative description of different aspects of London, different people, events, events on a timeline, places, concepts. So this is a little more in depth. This is just place by place, super fun. And so we're doing this because, like I said, we've got a lot going on with Europe. Last term, they were library books, so I had to return them. These will probably be done for 2 terms, and so we will just carry these forward. But our first term, we read a book about the UK and a book about Great Britain, and they were library books, so I had to return them. They were just basic, overview type of books. But this is what we're doing for that second lesson this term. If we finish those and we have room for more, we will look at, again, we've read this in Evening Basket, but I think I will put it back into our topical fun geography slot and reread Everything and Everywhere, a fact-filled adventure for curious globe trotters. And each 2-page spread tells about a place in a very visual way. And so then we will do the exact same thing. We will look up that place elsewhere and study more about it. And then I don't know that it will happen this year because, like I said, I think London may take us through our 3rd term. We will see. But either at the end of this year or the beginning of next year, at some point when that study of London is completed, so that very topical, very specific to a place study is completed, we will look at New York. So we will read Julia Rothman's Hello, New York. She is the nature anatomy lady, and I love this book, but we've never gotten to read it. And so we're definitely going to do a geography study. This will also obviously include a lot of culture and history and other things. And then while we're reading that, we will probably also tap back into this and just look at other cities in the United States too, so that we're not just looking solely at a single city, only because this is the primary resource I will use for that. And as you saw, I have a lot more meaty resources for London. And so I will want to sort of beef that up a little bit. In our systematic geography slot this year, all year long, we are looking at maps of the world's oceans. So this is systematic because it is truly taking the whole world and looking ocean by ocean, rather than just picking a topic like London, right? That is topical, panoramic, fun. This is systematic, but it's tied to our science. We're studying the ocean this year. And so this is a geographical concept that is important to me. The oceans have geography too. And so each section just sort of gives a variety of creatures, plants, historical. Sorry, these can be printed on the book's website. And so my children are using those along with the reading of the book. But creatures, plants, historical significance, structures that are there, like oil rigs and things like that, industries that are big in that part of the ocean, and then various maps of each ocean and different regions of the ocean. So that is our systematic geography all year long this year. Now, also with our School with Friends, so at our weekly day of school that we do with friends, we complete the Delighting in the World units from Delightfully Feasting, so my units. And these are U.S. geography through a lens of America's national parks. And so that is another type of geography that's just sort of extra. This is both topical and systematic, you could say, and it also includes mapping. And so it could be all that you do, but for us, it's just sort of extra. Because we rotate, we only do this about once a month. We take a long time to do each unit. We're currently doing unit 2. And we also do other things. And so I don't, if you were going to do it every week, it would be all that you would need to do. It includes mapping and systematic geography and topical geography. It includes a lot of cultural study and a lot of other connections. But for us, it's just a fun extra. And so for that, we're using the 50 States book, National Parks of the USA, America's National Parks. That's all a part of this year's geography as well. And then in our evening basket, I always keep some geography there. So we have the Round the World quiz book. Just once a week or so, we will open it up and take one of the little quizzes and find out some extra information about the world. I always keep something like this. This is from Lonely Planet Kids. I love a lot of their books, but I always try to keep something geographical in our evening basket, for the most part, generally speaking. And then because we're looking at Great Britain a lot this year, I also have this super fun, not for parents, Great Britain, Everything You Ever Wanted to Know. And so it's about Great Britain, but it talks about like crazy laws that they still have there, and different dogs that have, lived in Buckingham Palace, not just the Queen's, but and medical marvels and the Great Game of Golf, and Tea Mania and coal, Dickens. It just 2-page spreads. Within 2-page spreads, it just covers a wide variety of fun topics about Great Britain. So that is evening basket geography. For our mapping, it's pretty simple. Every week we do our Story of the World map because that's what we use for history. And so that is our contextual mapping. It is tied directly to our history. And then we will also add in any other mapping in that slot that is tied to our other streams of history, our British history, our world history. That is our world history, but our topical history. So we're doing like sea and sky. And so if there's anything that applies, we will add that in as well. And then along with that, our systematic mapping right now is maps and mapping. One kind of map at a time, reading, practicing, adding in some videos and things like that. Just learning about different kinds of maps one at a time. All right. On to cultural studies to finish off here. So cultural studies, as I said, this is where we really live out our identity as citizens of an entire world. This is where we put into practice the art of dignifying other human beings and not just tolerating the Imago Dei, but valuing the Imago Dei. Not just knowing that all people are made in the image of God, but sort of allowing ourselves to subconsciously other people and to elevate certain groups of people above others, but instead to truly want to behold the beauty in all of God's image bearers and to know that that beauty is inherent in all of them, and that there is not a superior beauty in one type of person. This is where we practice that, we live it out, we prove it to be true, we show it to our children, and then we also pursue it because we have learned to value it. Cultural studies are where a widened vision is really found. So we can make our geography panoramic. We can make our mapping gentle. We can add in architecture and really, really see more of history and humanity. But in each of those things, we're going to encounter culture. When we see the architecture of a time, when we see the history of a time, historical events of a time, when we understand the geography of a place, that the time that we're studying it was held in, that happened in, occurred in all of those things, we're going to encounter people. And so in our cultural studies, we get to intentionally practice over and over and over again the art of widening our vision to know more and more about people. Humanities are anchored in humanity. The study of humanities is not a list of dates and deeds. It's not a list of wars and battles and happenings. It's not a list of treaties and deals and political movements. It is the story of people. And so if our humanities are not focused on humanity, then we're doing something wrong. And so the rest of it, even the practical aspects of it, right? Even the geography memory work that gives us a picture of how vastly God has created the world. All of that is good. But overall, our humanities are anchored in humanity, and cultural studies allows us to know that and to live that. It gives context and nuance. When in history or in geography, you read that such and such happened because, so-and-so traveled down the river and was able to sneak up on so-and-so because of whatever, right? You understand that when you understand culture and when you understand the geography of a place, right? So both, oh, my goodness, a stack of books fell. And I don't know what I thought was in this room with me when nothing is in fact in this room with me. But that just scared me to death. Oh my goodness. Okay. Anyways, both are made richer and more nuanced and more dimensional. They have more depth when they are in tandem, right? When we're exploring both. Appreciation, empathy, beauty, honor. In cultural studies, we find appreciation for people. We find empathy for people. We understand why things have happened and why people see the world the way that they see it, and can empathize with it when we meet people. Beauty, again, with understanding and beholding the vast variety of beauty of God's image bearers and learning how to honor those people. It's the backdrop for all other humanities. Again, in every other humanities lesson, you will meet people. And so your cultural studies serves as a backdrop for that. Some general practices here, just like with every other subject. Explore the world country by country. That is one way to go about it. Just take one country, explore its culture, which will also often lead you to geography and history and lots of other things, even nature, and then move to a different country. You can also learn about people, again, through your tales, through the different stories that you're reading, but also incorporate references. I showed you several of those, not necessarily for cultural studies, but we use them for those too. Articles, first-person accounts. So the tales of a region, for every region or country that we look at, I make sure that we read some folk tales from that place because they tell you a lot about the culture, the stories that people have told. But then again, also incorporate reference books and just learn some general information. Just don't let that be all you do. Look at articles and videos, current information, and also look anytime that you can find someone's own voice, anytime that you can find personal accounts of a culture from someone within that culture, do that as well. Keep a cultural notebook. We just keep this right in our history binders. But make sure that you're doing drawings and narrations, writing down quotes. Make sure that you are encouraging your children and you yourself to take possession of ideas from your cultural studies. Mason mentions a notebook that is something akin to a cultural notebook. Explore the world through different lenses. So instead of going country by country, one way that you can do this is to look at clothing and then go from region to region, but through the lens of their clothing. And then, of course, clothing will lead you to all sorts of other things: religion, um, um, the sheer temperature of a place can be revealed, the climate of a place, the geography of a place, again, the primary religion, the practices, the culture of a place, the primary professions and things that people do, the way that people, see the world and see each other, the way that they see festivity and community. A lot of that can be revealed in clothing. So you could take clothing as your lens. You could take food. That's super fun. We've done that before. Religion, you can look at religion specifically as a lens for your cultural study. Recreation, so you can just look at the sports everywhere. We've done that. We've looked at the sport that there's a specific book. I wish I would have brought it up here, but it's really hard to find, but it's a wonderful book. It shows a drawing by one child from a place, and it has a poem by another child of a place, and it has a photograph of children in that place. But then one thing that it did was talk about the primary game or sport. It didn't talk about it. It just listed it. It was just a single simple fact on the page. And so for a long time, that was our cultural studies. We would look at that book. We would just look at the children through the very simple lens of what they eat, the language they speak, the sport that they play, a poem, and a drawing that represents the culture through the lens of the children. But then that led us to looking up and sort of doing a term-long study of the primary games or sports that are played in each place. So that is super fun as well. And then through the lens of language, of course. You can also complete cultural topical studies. You can just look through the lens of a specific unit or curriculum or resource that is available. There are lots of those kinds of things available. Like I said, even the fairy lore of the world that we're going to do next term, I'm putting that in our tales slot, but it's also cultural studies. And so that could work too. And then you can also incorporate thematic units. That would be an example of that as well. But just keeping in mind that just because something is zeroed in or on a topic or a theme, so, some of the things that I already mentioned as far as the different lenses, those can be themes. But just because you find a resource that zeroes in on one of those things, you don't have to feel like it's not big enough or vast enough. You can do that. And then at other times you can go country by country, or over 12 years of honing in on a theme or a topic. I think that it is still going to make you look back and say, wow, we've really seen a lot of the world. So for cultural studies, we primarily and often use the free country units from Little World Wonders. I've already mentioned her several times because we use a lot of her resources. But we did Norway last term. This has geography, tales, picture books. It has a lot of things, and I just put it into our cultural studies lesson, even if it's geography. Like even on the week where we look at the geography of Norway, I still just keep it in the cultural studies lesson. You could take this and put it into a lot of different lessons instead. But I just consider it, the geography is a part of the culture, and I've already got a lot of other geography going on. So we just use these as cultural studies, one part of it at a time. So we did Norway last term. We're doing France this term. And then we're doing Germany next term, again, because we are doing a lot involving Europe. One thing that I forgot to say for mapping is that in term 3, we will also use the Draw Europe book. We will we will just do a couple pages of that every week for the term, and they will hand draw a map of Europe. We have used, I'm sure you've seen that series, but we have used several of that series. They have drawn Africa and the United States. They have drawn South America. And so we're going to use the Draw Europe one. I forgot to say that. In our cultural studies, we also, this is an example of a topical or I would call this more a thematic unit. And just to kind of give you, just to step back for a second and give you an example of what the difference between topical and thematic would be. I would call this a thematic unit, and it's just one resource, but we are often looking at religion as part of our cultural studies. And so alternating with our lessons in the France unit, we are looking at all of the world's major religions a little bit at a time. So we're using this across at least 2 terms. And then diving into, other videos and other things too, but sort of using this as our primary spine. So this is thematic because it is religion as a theme. We look at all the world's major religions, how that is intertwined with and how it impacts culture, what the culture of a place is in direct relation to its religion and what it's not in direct relation to its primary religion, et cetera, et cetera. This is religion itself is often a part of our cultural studies. But this is thematic. We have also specifically during specific times, we are a Christian family. And so Ramadan is not something that we observe, but during Ramadan, this would be an example of a topical study. During Ramadan, we did this unit also from Little World Wonders about what Ramadan means to those in the religion of Islam. And we did a lot of these things. We also, again, found different videos and other resources too, some books from the library, but it's just important to me that my children understand other people. And so, again, religion and other faiths are often a part of our cultural studies because religion and culture are inextricable. They are intertwined, and we don't really understand a culture if we don't understand its primary religion. And so, because of that, and because I want my children to understand and respect other people, and be able to articulate what other people believe, and if they're going to discuss their own beliefs with other people, they should be able to respectfully articulate accurately what it is that other people believe. And so because of all of that, it is often a part of our cultural studies. But this is an example of how that takes a thematic form. And then this would be an example of how that could take a topical form. And then that could apply to lots of things, not just religion. Your food could take a thematic form, right? You could just look at pasta around the world, right? But then you could also allow that to have a topical approach instead. And you could look at spaghetti and where it came from, and then how it got elsewhere and how it's been changed and how different cultures do it, right? So thematic or topical. I wanted to backtrack a little bit and say a little bit more about what I mean by that. But then again, there are also often resources that are those things already. And you may not, when you see them, you may not know exactly what to do with it. And so I think that it helps to have this lens of cultural studies and say, okay, sometimes cultural studies is region by region. Sometimes it is a lens that I've chosen, right? So clothing, and that could be thematic or topical, but then sometimes it comes to me prepared in a topical form, and I can just plop this right into my cultural studies lessons. All right, so that is the last that I will say. The other thing that is in your notes came from my living education workshop, the humanities session of that, and it's just a little bit about quantity and quality of humanities and how you can truly have both. And it's just a few notes about that. I just wanted to include it here because I think that it's relevant. And I think that as you're attempting to widen your vision and spread your feast further when it comes to humanities, that it's helpful to know that that doesn't mean that it has to become more shallow just because you're spreading it wider. That you can actually have both. And so I'm not going to go through these notes here because I have already taught about them in that workshop, in that session of that workshop. And because I think that they are, pretty self-explanatory and sustaining here, but they're just a few little things for you to think about, considerations that I wanted to pull out of that and include here too, because I think it's relevant. So I think that you'll be able to read those and be encouraged by them, or at least have a way to ask a further question if you want to explore something further. So I hope that all of this has been equipping, encouraging, edifying if you needed to be prodded a little bit to widen your vision, or just equipping if you already pursue that. Maybe you've got some more resources or some more ideas or some more ways of approaching that pursuit. Either way, I hope that it has been encouraging and that you have gained both some perspective and also some practical tools from it. Don't hesitate to follow up with your questions. I truly don't mind. I love answering them. And also don't hesitate to share the ways that you're incorporating some of this. I love to see that too. All right. Be blessed. Have a good rest of your day, evening, weekend, week, whenever you're watching this. Bye-bye.